Hey everybody, Zenrotto here bringing you another guide video. Today we're going to be talking about the new mode Dokkan Battlefield that just came out for LR GINYU and some various other prizes. It's a pretty fun mode. There's been a lot of complaining about it, a lot of people have been kind of sour to it at first, but hopefully once you kind of learn a little bit more what everyone does, you will just kind of enjoy it a little bit more. You know what I mean? So you get to pick 100 units. Mine are already chosen. Once you pick the 100 the first time, they stay selected unless you want to change it, because selecting 100 units was actually really annoying. I don't have mine picked out like strategically. I literally just picked pretty much the top 100 from top to bottom. But let's go ahead and get started here. So you have the 3 lanes, and then you can see the enemy units coming down across the lanes. You got a physical Raditz, and you got a tech Vegeta. So I'm going to win the type advantage, because type advantage in this mode is actually super important. But not just type advantage, different colors actually do different things. They're sort of like RPG classes almost. Physical units are tanks. Your STR units are more like your DPS, like your warriors or whatever you want to call them. They're your generic damage dealing units. Your AGL units like Kaioken down here have higher movement speed. So you can blitz empty lanes with AGL units to hurry to the enemy goal. Int units are weird. The more int units you have together, the stronger they are, apparently. And they do additional damage to the barrier. So basically, you want to clear the path for your int units to come in and shatter your opponent's barrier. That's the main way you want to use them. Okay, so the enemy barrier just broke. And now you can see up at the top, you've got all of the units that made it into the battle. And you can select them here. The first one that you pick is your leader, and then the rest of the ones that you pick fill out the remainder of the team. And you go into your boss battle. And this part is just a regular Dokkan battle, so there's not that much to talk about. The bosses do get a little difficult. I don't know if we'll go all the way there, because I recorded an entire playthrough of this, and it was like 30 minutes of footage, so I'm probably not going to use all of it. I'll probably just use a little bit of it to go through. But this plays just like a normal Dokkan fight, and the earlier bosses, I think this is stage 8, the earlier bosses aren't too bad. For those of you wondering why I started on stage 8, when you reach certain threshold like of points, every stage you get to, you get a checkpoint stage. So like if you hit stage 11, which is where I stopped last time, you queue in the next time at stage 8. That way you can do the harder stages with your full deck, and it lets you get further in to get better rewards and to get higher little gem totals. So you see there's the gems that I have, and the bottom one is the gems that are like your total gems, and they just add up as you go. So we're in stage 9, and you'll notice that, oh wow, actually, you know, I was going to lead into something else, but they didn't. It's just a ton of STR units. See, there's an STR unit blitzing down at the bottom. Here we go. So you see how they're leading with physical units and then sending all these other units in behind them? Remember, this is because physical units are your tanks, and as a player, you're going to employ a pretty similar strategy to what the computer is doing. You're going to put all of your physical units out primarily first, and then follow up with damage dealers. Now you see down here at the bottom, I'm going to play this Gotenks right here. You see how Goku's getting swarmed? Tech units are actually really cool, because tech units are AoE. So watch, Gotenks just completely clear. Look at that. Look at all the units that Gotenks is just killing. Because tech attacks hit multiple enemies, and it allows your tech units to completely clear out those crowds of little guys. So you've got your physical tanks, your STR fighters, your tech crowd control, your intelligent barrier breakers, and then your AGL units are like your scouts or your support units. All they do is they move really quickly, so it allows you to blitz the enemy and get through. So another thing you can do is see enemies are still on the screen, but I can continue. And you can also continue without having a full team. So you don't have to kill all the enemies to proceed, you just have to break the barrier, and then you may continue whenever you want once all the units that you want are through the little enemy wall. Once your units have passed the back end, they can be brought in and played with. Like, it's not a problem. Because I'm doing this for a tutorial, I'm not doing the greatest job ever. But you can see I'm using a lot of my my high value units early, which I shouldn't be doing. But I'm doing it anyway just to blitz through the fights so that you guys can get a better view of the actual battlefield. definitely did not need to bring Omega, Black, Gogeta, all of these guys just to fight Ginyu. And then you can see victory. These are the ones you get. There's your total. So I got 445 for that round. And we proceed. And this should be stage 10. Yep. And there's the same general formation, triple tank. So we'll put some STRs out just to break the tanks. We'll put a tank up top. Send Vegeta in behind Rildo so that we can break the barrier, because Rildo's already at the barrier. And see, it's nice once you start putting pressure on the enemy barrier, enemies spawn in, but they're immediately hit by the pressure that you have on the barrier. So they can't bypass your guys, they have to fight through them. We have another Dokkan fight coming up, but I'm not going to make you sit through that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a recap. Since there's not quite as much to talk about like there was in the dupe system video, where I actually could show you each node and what each one does, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an image recap at the end here, and we're going to talk about exactly what each color unit does, why it's important, and how you want to go about pushing each lane. Okay. So first, let's talk about STR units. Now these guys are going to be your fighters, your damage dealers, I don't care, whatever you want to call them. Whatever RPG class you want to equate them to. They have no real major weaknesses, they're not particularly bad at anything. They're generally strong damage dealers, and they're best used behind a physical unit to help clear a path. Basically, the simple idea behind using STR units is that you use your physical units to endure hits and have enemies sort of like wall off the enemy. And then your STR units come in behind them to pick the enemies off one at a time. It's pretty much if you're familiar with an MMO, it's pretty much a standard like tank and spank strategy, where your only job really is to wall the enemies off with the tank, and then have the STR break through. They do normal damage, the same damage to the barrier that they do to enemies, so they don't have any sort of major advantage of either one. But you're going to want to have a decent amount of STR units, probably a pretty high amount, especially because of Kami and his ridiculous amount of HP. You're going to want to make sure that you have STR units available, especially to burn through your major enemies like Dodoria, Zarbon, Kami, Vegeta, Ginyu, etc. You don't really need to waste STRs on small groups of weaker enemies since they die so easily. These guys are kind of going to be like your main DPS, or the guys that are going to go after the bigger health targets and the higher priority targets. Physical units, ironically enough, are the tanks of Dokkan Battlefield. So what this means is they have high health, they have high defense, they're really good at stalling out enemy pushes, and they're really good at leading charges. I know a lot of people complain about Kami. Kami is a physical tank. He does what he does best, he has a ton of health. Now, tanks are weird in that there's a couple strategies you can use with them, and now mind you, this is like a day 2 video, so strategies will become more apparent as the game goes on. But for right now, at low levels, you can do what's called a tank sack, or you can tank sacrifice. You can take a couple lanes with a tank and just let them hold the lane while you blitz a single lane with either AGL, INT, or whatever units to hurry up and break down the barrier and get through. Now you call it a tank sacrifice because those tanks will not make it through the barrier. They will not be able to participate in battle, and they've been played, so that means that they're no longer in your deck. But it lets you blitz the barrier a little bit faster and break it down a little bit sooner back in the early stages where you only need a couple characters to beat the weak bosses. When you start getting to the later phases, tanks are a must-have. You need them to push through the enemy lines and set up your techs, your STRs, your AGLs, whatever offensive strategy you choose, you need to have a tank there to support it. You're just not going to be able to fight through the waves and waves of enemies that are coming without some way to slow the waves down and set up for easier kills, and that is where tanks excel. Now, int units are tricky. I don't really have a fancy RPG term to equate them to, so I just call them barrier breaking units. Int units are unique in that they do good damage to the barrier as opposed to random enemies on the map, and the more ints that you stack in a single spot, the higher damage that they do combined. So basically what you do with int units, the same thing that you do with other units. You stack your physical in the front, you clear your lane. Once your lane is clear and the enemies can't break through, you can send multiple int units toward the barrier, and that way they can hurry up and break the barrier down before more enemies continue to spawn. Int's high damage rate in dealing with the barrier kind of lets you use a bit of a blitz strategy where you can take a single lane and you can push through that lane and break it, while you just use a couple tanks to sort of block off other paths. So you can kind of get more of like an attrition victory, whereas the enemy can't break through your lanes, and you're only really winning one lane, but you have so much int in that lane that you can break the wall down quickly and still get through. The only issue with this is that int isn't particularly good at fighting on the map. They're not going to be able to break stuff down behind a physical, so int needs really heavy escort. Usually they're going to have, in addition to a physical, either an STR or even a tech maybe, helping push through that lane for them, because they're just not very good at pushing through the lane by themselves. They tend to lose a lot of matchups. They can't, I don't want to say they can't outfight units, because they do beat, tech units on the board, obviously, because type advantage is so important, but they struggle to win on board matchups, and that makes int really hard to use in a lot of fights. Tech units are your crowd control units. These are guys that burn down big groups of smaller enemies. You're not going to really want to take them against boss enemies like Dodoria, Zarbon, or Ginyu, just because they have no basic combat advantages. They don't bring anything to the table in a regular battle. What they're so good at, though, is stopping opponent lane pushes and opponent swarms. Like you saw earlier with adult Gotenks, when large groups of weaker enemies, just your generic enemies like Frieza soldiers, Bobby soldiers, whatever, start pushing a lane, tech units can clear all of them out incredibly quickly. The issue with enemy pushes is that they have a tendency to stall out your tanks. Single tanks can kill them off one at a time, but it's difficult for them to break through those big pushes because they don't do very much damage, and it takes them a very long time to whittle down each one of the enemies. Tech units can come in and do a high amount of damage in a large area and mitigate the need for slowing down your push in an individual lane. I don't know the full range of how far their AoE attack goes, but it does go pretty far. I imagine it hits everyone that's currently engaged, like is classified as engaged in battle, and they're very effective at clearing out little groups. Usually I use tech units defensively. They're not super great at pushing, but if enemies do spawn a swarm while you're already at the barrier, they can break that up. But these are primarily going to be defensive support units to help your physical units stop large enemy pushes. I also wanted to touch on what I'm calling mini-boss enemies. You can call them whatever you want. They're just the regular enemies from the series. These are your named enemies, not your grunt soldiers, people like Captain Ginyu. You're going to see these guys a lot, and they're going to be your primary engagement when you're trying to break through to the enemy barrier. These guys absolutely prey on type advantage. Do not send out a card that is weak to a different card just because you think, oh, this is Tech Beerus, he's a TUR, he's a Dokkan Fest unit, he should beat Captain Ginyu. He will not beat Captain Ginyu. Captain Ginyu will solo him without any problem at all. You need to counter these guys either with type advantage of your own, especially in the early levels where formation doesn't matter as much, or you need to counter them with proper formation. You need a physical there tanking their hits. You need an STR there burning them down. You need an agility ready to rush to the rescue if things aren't working out the way you want them to. These guys are going to primarily start pushes. You're going to see them a lot really early on. There's a lot of first turn Dodorias, there's a lot of first turn Zarbons, and so you need to be ready when you see them to have a plan to get around them to push through that lane. You can tank sack in early stages and just let your guy die and block a Dodoria forever, but that's not going to work in the late stages. So you need to be ready with a counter strategy every time you see a notable enemy fly out and start pushing a lane against you. And there is your general basics guide for Dokkan Battlefield. I know it does not necessarily go into as much detail as a lot of people wanted. I just didn't really know how far to take it for just an early video. I wanted to make sure that people who have no idea what they're doing at least have now some idea what they're doing. If you guys want me to go more in depth with Dokkan Battlefield, if you want to see more of this mode, I can do things like strategy videos, challenge videos, rush videos. things that can just help you get a better understanding of how you need to approach individual lanes and push through, and how to take advantage of enemy formations, how to deal with each individual stage. The stages are scripted. They're set every time you fight them. So every time you go through the stage, you can get a better understanding of where you need to go and where you need to push. But in general, there's also just simple strategies that work across all of the stages that you can learn to employ as well. If you guys are interested in seeing that, let me know. I can certainly do more advanced videos, but I wanted this first one just to sort of be a primer for people who are completely stuck and are falling behind and not getting their rewards on time, to be able to get in there and start winning fights and feeling like they're keeping up. So thank you guys for watching. This has just been another guide, and we will see you next time, hopefully with some more Dokkan Battlefield content.